The air in Atlanta, Georgia, carried the humid heat of summer, but within the walls of Northwood High School, a breeze of hope seemed to blow. Eleanor Vance, with her calm and welcoming voice, was the source of that breeze. Her deep, expressive eyes reflected the passion she felt for every student who walked through the door of her history and social studies classroom. For Eleanor, teaching was not just about transmitting facts. It was about igniting flames, nurturing minds, and empowering voices. At Northwood, a public school in a lower middle-class neighborhood, diversity was the backbone. Black, Latino, Asian students, each brought with them a rich tapestry of experiences and perspectives. Eleanor understood this. Her classes were not limited to dates and names. They explored the nuances of history, the struggles for justice, the silenced voices. She encouraged them to question, to debate, to see the world through critical and empathetic lenses. The smell of chalk and old books mingled with the lively buzz of the hallways, a sound that, for Eleanor, was the melody of learning. "Who defines history?" she would ask, and hands would shoot up, eager. "Those who write it," one student would reply. "Those who live it," another would retort. Eleanor would smile, a smile that reached her eyes, reflecting the sparkle she saw in theirs. She spoke of the Civil Rights March, not as a distant event, but as a living legacy, connecting it to contemporary struggles for equity. She discussed the importance of Sojourner Truth and Frederick Douglass, not as dusty figures, but as beacons of resilience and courage. For many of her students, Eleanor was the first teacher who made them feel truly seen and represented in the curriculum. Her methods, however, did not go unnoticed. In parent meetings and WhatsApp groups from more affluent neighborhoods, Eleanor Vance's name began to be whispered with a mixture of curiosity and distrust. "What is she teaching? It seems like she's dividing the children, not uniting them," a mother would ask. "It seems like she's dividing the children, not uniting them," another would comment. The seeds of discontent, watered by fear and ignorance, began to germinate. Eleanor, oblivious to the storm brewing on the horizon, continued to be the lighthouse, illuminating the path for her students, one by one, day after day. The hum of conversations in the hallways, once a melody, began to take on a dissonant tone, a subtle harbinger of the discord to come. The initial whisper of discontent soon transformed into a strident chorus. Arthur Sterling, a real estate magnate with a polished smile and cold eyes, and Victoria Hayes, a socialite with a soft voice that hid a steely determination, were the maestros of this orchestra of defamation. To them, Eleanor Vance was not an educator, she was a threat. Her lessons on social justice and racial history were, in their minds, indoctrination and divisive propaganda that undermined the community's traditional values. Parent meetings, once forums for discussing student progress, became stages for veiled and sometimes open attacks against Eleanor. The smell of strong coffee and the tension in the air were almost palpable. Arthur, with his imposing posture and grave voice, articulated concerns about the curriculum, always with a tone of concern for the school's unity. Victoria, for her part, used her network of contacts to spread rumors, distorting Eleanor's words, turning academic discussions into accusations of inciting hatred. "She's teaching our children to hate themselves," she'd whisper to groups of mothers, her discreet jewels glinting under the fluorescent lights of the auditorium. Eleanor tried to defend herself. At one meeting, she explained the importance of an inclusive curriculum, the need for her students to understand the complexity of American history. "I'm not dividing," she argued, her voice firm despite the growing hostility. "I'm uniting by showing that everyone's history matters." But her words fell on deaf ears, open only to the narrative that Sterling and Hayes had carefully constructed. The hum of phones and the click of cameras in secret meetings where strategies were plotted were the sound of the conspiracy in motion. Director Thompson, a well-meaning but weak man in the face of political and economic pressure, began to yield. Arthur Sterling's calls to the school board, the veiled threats of withdrawing donations, the constant flow of emails and letters from concerned parents, all of this eroded his resistance. Eleanor felt the chill of the principal's office, the weight of unspoken words, the silent betrayal. The bitter taste of injustice began to settle in her mouth. One day, the news came. A formal, cold, and impersonal letter informing her of her dismissal, effective immediately due to irreconcilable differences with the school's educational philosophy. The public humiliation was overwhelming. Her name, once synonymous with excellence, was now dragged through the mud. Articles in local newspapers, funded by the antagonists, painted her as a dangerous radical. Eleanor Vance's reputation, built with years of dedication and passion, was destroyed in a matter of weeks. She left Northwood High School not with anger, but with deep pain and the feeling that something fundamental had been broken. The silence that followed her departure was more deafening than any scream, a testament to the temporary victory of shadows over light. The years that followed Eleanor's dismissal were a period of self-imposed exile, but not of defeat. She left Atlanta, carrying with her not only the pain of injustice, but also the seed of resilience. The initial silence of her new life, far from the noisy corridors of Northwood High, was filled with incessant reading, in-depth research, and reflection. She delved into studies on educational policies, systemic racism, and community empowerment strategies. The rustle of book pages and the sound of inspiring lectures at academic conferences became her new soundtrack. Eleanor, who was once a dedicated teacher, transformed into an educational researcher, author, and activist. Her voice, once heard only in classrooms, now echoed in seminars and publications. She wrote incisive articles on the importance of representation in the curriculum and the dangers of educational censorship. The pain of injustice, instead of paralyzing her, became the fuel for her determination. She was not seeking revenge in the literal sense, but a justice that transcended her own experience, a reform that would prevent other educators and students from suffering the same fate. From afar, Eleanor followed the news from Atlanta. The educational system, without her critical voice, seemed to stagnate. Racial divisions in the school community deepened, and the voices of influential parents like Sterling and Hayes continued to dictate the agenda. She saw the negative impact on her former students, who now faced a less inclusive and inspiring environment. The warmth of new friendships and support in her new circle of activists and academics strengthened her, but the feeling of unfinished business in Atlanta persisted. The decision to return was not driven by anger, but a greater purpose. It was a call to action, a conviction that her experience and newly acquired knowledge could make a difference. She would not return to take revenge on Sterling and Hayes, but to expose the truth, unmask their hypocrisy, and reform a system that allowed racism and abuse of power to thrive. The sweet taste of hope, mixed with the bitter memory of the past, propelled her forward. Eleanor Vance was coming home, not as a victim, but as an unstoppable force, with a meticulous plan and a renewed sense of purpose. The seed of resilience had blossomed, and now it was time to reap the fruits of justice. Eleanor's return to Atlanta was discreet, almost a whisper in the city's warm breeze, but her presence, even silent, began to reverberate. She was not alone. Marcus M.J. Jones, her former student, now a promising investigative journalist, was the first to connect. MJ, who had watched Eleanor's downfall with youthful indignation, now saw an opportunity to right a wrong. The creak of doors in old archives and the dusty smell of forgotten documents became the backdrop for their initial investigations. Together, they began to unravel the intricate web of lies and manipulations woven by Arthur Sterling and Victoria Hayes. Eleanor and MJ worked tirelessly. The frantic tapping of keyboards late into the night, the blue glow of computer screens illuminating their concentrated faces, were the soundtrack to their search for truth. They scoured public records, interviewed former school employees who had been silenced by fear, and even infiltrated online parent groups where the seeds of defamation had been sown. Every email, every recording, every testimony was a piece of the puzzle, revealing the extent of the conspiracy. The confrontations, initially indirect, began to become more direct. Eleanor, with her new armor of knowledge and strategy, was no longer the idealistic, vulnerable teacher. At a charity event, she crossed paths with Victoria Hayes. The socialite, with her forced smile and eyes that avoided hers, tried to disguise her discomfort. Eleanor, with a disturbing calm, merely commented on the importance of transparency in education. Victoria felt cold sweat on her forehead, a crack in her impeccable facade. Arthur Sterling, for his part, tried to use his influence to stifle MJ's growing curiosity. Threatening calls, offers of exclusives to divert attention, nothing worked. MJ, with the determination of a lion, refused to be intimidated. The tension in the city was almost palpable, like a distant thunder announcing an impending storm. With each new discovery, public indignation grew, fueled by MJ's careful and well-documented reports. The climax was approaching. Eleanor and MJ had gathered irrefutable evidence, emails exchanged between Sterling and Hayes detailing the defamation campaign, recordings of secret meetings where Eleanor's racial agenda was distorted, and testimonies from parents who had been coerced into signing false petitions. The truth, once buried under layers of lies, was ready to come to light. The heat of public outrage was a powerful force, and the stage was set for the revelation that would shake Atlanta and expose the hypocrisy of its good citizens. The day of the public hearing at the Atlanta School Board dawned with an almost electric tension. The room was packed with the press, parents, students, and curious citizens. Arthur Sterling and Victoria Hayes, seated in the front row, displayed a forced confidence, their smiles tense and their eyes restless. Eleanor Vance, beside Marcus M.J. Jones, radiated a serene calm, the determination in her eyes brighter than ever. MJ began to present the evidence. Each email read, each recording played, each testimony from coerced parents was a blow to the antagonist's facade of respectability. Cold sweat on Sterling and Hayes's foreheads became visible, their faces paling as the web of their lies unraveled. The room, once filled with whispers, was now in a stunned silence, broken only by MJ's firm voice and the clicks of journalists' cameras. Eleanor then took the floor. Her voice, once soft, now resonated with the strength of years of injustice and resilience. She spoke not of revenge, but of justice, accountability, and the transformative power of education. "This is not just about me," she declared, her eyes sweeping the room, meeting those of her former students, now adults, seated in the audience. "This is about every child who deserves an education free from prejudice, every teacher who deserves to teach the truth without fear." The heat of public indignation transformed into a warmth of solidarity, and the room erupted in applause. The consequences were devastating for Sterling and Hayes. Arthur's reputation crumbled, his businesses hit by boycotts and investigations. Victoria, isolated by her own network of gossip, saw her social status evaporate. National media covered the scandal, turning Eleanor into a symbol of the fight against systemic racism in education. But Eleanor's true victory was not the downfall of her tormentors, but the transformation that followed. The Atlanta School Board, under new leadership, initiated profound reforms. The curriculum was revised to be more inclusive, anti-racist training programs were implemented for teachers and administrators, and the voices of marginalized parents and students were finally heard. Eleanor, now a respected consultant and an influential voice, played a fundamental role in this process. The smell of freshly cut grass on a renovated school campus, the touch of hands joining in solidarity, the sweet taste of collective victory. All of this was the harvest of her struggle. Eleanor watched her former students, now young adults, thrive in a more just environment. She saw the new generation of teachers, inspired by her courage, teaching with passion and without fear. Eleanor Vance's vengeance was not an act of blind retribution, but a catalyst for change. Proof that education, resilience, and the tireless pursuit of justice can indeed transform the world. The vision of a brighter future, built on the foundations of truth and equity, was her greatest reward.